So I'd like to welcome Iain Davis on the podcast. He's a blogger and researcher, covers many different topics, and is an advocate for critical thinking. So, Iain, I've invited you on the podcast because one of which is I'm trying to build a tool that actually helps people like yourself, investigative researchers, specifically independent researchers, because I think it's important that people make up their own perspectives and are not beholden by any kind of editorial or entity of any sort to define what is correct or not correct. So I'm very, very interested in, first off, like how you got into this. How did you get into research or journalism or investigation? What was the spurring moment for you where you're like, okay, I want to pursue this, and why?
Well, I've always been interested in subjects like, current affairs and history and so forth. And I've always written. I've always been when I was younger at school, I was always writing stories and I did a bit of journalism at school, the school paper and all that kind of thing. And then later in my working life, I worked predominantly throughout my life in health and social care. I was a union steward as well. And I used to, write some pieces for the union and Union magazine. And I was always, like writing emails to people that were questioning policies and things like that. So, and I think it was around, it wasn't 9/11 itself so much that made me kind of rethink the whole kind of power, how power operates. It was some years later when my partner actually, sort of said to me, "You do realise, of course, that 9/11 was, the story we've been given about it was a load of rubbish." And I suddenly realised, well, yeah, I do realise that, but it wasn't something that I'd articulated to myself. And I'd been reading people like Brzezinski and Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley and people like that, and and also reading people like Anthony C. Sutton about Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution and so forth.
Right.
These kind of things led me to believe and led me to pursue and be interested in what one might call kind of how the mechanism of global power, how it actually operates, not necessarily how we're told, or well, definitely not how we're told it operates. And I was increasingly aware that that what I often refer to as the political class were not the primary decision makers. And then as I looked into it further, obviously it became obvious to me that there was kind of like a policy agenda that flows from a kind of centralized, the think tanks, and and they're and that's something that I was very interested in. And I was made redundant in, I'm not quite sure when it was. I think it was about 26, maybe a bit later. I can't quite remember. I think probably about 2016, 2017. And in my sector in the UK, that's a common occurrence. Funding roles usually, especially when you're working in the private sector, funding roles on a kind of 3-year basis, and you win contracts, you lose contracts, and when you lose contracts, people get made redundant. So all services lose funding. If even in the public sector, services lose funding and you get made redundant. So it's a common problem in that sector. So I was made redundant again, and so this time I just thought, I'm enjoying writing. I'd already started writing the blog, and I did that very much as a hobby, and it was on the subjects that we just discussed, global power and also critical thinking and truth, and I was very interested in this notion of trust in information. And I thought, right, well, I'll give it a go. I'll see if I can write on a more full-time basis. I had no idea how that would work. I'd got no idea how I could monetize that, if I could. Is it even possible to earn a living doing this? I knew that the subjects that I was writing about. I did some retraining as a journalist. I did a vocational qualification as a journalist. But I was aware that I not only would I be unlikely to get a job in quote unquote mainstream journalism, I wasn't interested in what they were writing about. I just found it really banal kind of, and not, you know, lowest common denominator stuff in terms of the subject matter, but also interlaced with that was all the propaganda. So I realised that I wanted to write about that. So I thought, well, I'm not, the legacy media aren't going to be interested in me writing about that for them. So
No,
I
not
knew that I
likely.
had to do it independently. I had to do it independently, and I didn't know whether that was possible. And I was very fortunate that some larger independent outlets, people like Whitney Webb at Unlimited, Hangout, and Off Guardian often share my work, and Geopolitics and Empire as well. But these that have got a bigger audience, they've got a bigger audience for their readership. Were interested in what I was writing about, and that enabled me to kind of do it more. And then there's obviously there's also new platforms that have sprung up like Substack,
Yep.
which enable you to monetize your work. And obviously that's something that I use quite a lot. And my Substack, I write on that. And what I tend to do is I write more irreverent sometimes and more kind of forthright stuff on the Substack. But I am very wary of being reliant on one platform or one outlet or one, and I think that's a real problem. As a lot of people found in the independent media when they started demonetizing people on Patreon.
Yeah.
If that's a significant proportion of your income, then that's a real problem. So I'm very keen to also maintain my own blog.
Yep.
Because I'm able to reach out to my relatively small audience, but I'm thankfully a growing audience, and they're people that I can contact directly via email. So regardless of what reach that I might have on, and I don't really use social media so much. I use X, Twitter, but I'm just hopelessly shadow banned on there. I mean, it's pointless, really. I more use Twitter actually for research.
Interesting.
I use it for finding out what we're supposed to believe.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, rather like the reading the mainstream media, I or listening to the mainstream media. I don't tend to watch the news very much, but I do listen to it in the mornings. In the UK, there's a news program that comes out every morning on the BBC called Today. So I listen to that not because I find anything that they say particularly credible, but rather because I don't, but what I am aware of that, and the good thing about Today is it's giving you the news cycle for the day. So it's telling you what the news cycle is going to be today,
Yeah.
and telling you what the themes are today.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, something that I'm very keen to point out to people is, we should be using all information sources.
Yep.
Because there is information in all of these sources, regardless who writes it or where it comes from or which outlet produced it. So, for example, I've recently written a book, and one of the things that I discuss in the book is that obviously I've cited and I've referenced a lot of media outlets, a lot of legacy media outlets in this book, but I've also criticized these legacy media outlets. And the reason that I've referenced them is so that the reader can go and check out the information source. So
Yep.
they can go to that source. And what for example, in the legacy media, quotes, you get quotes from people, you get quotes from politicians, quotes from journalists. So the information's in there, but if you go to a source, and something, a real bugbear of mine is this issue of trust. We need to trust the media. If you go there with a blank trust that whatever it tells you is true, then you're going to be hopelessly misled forever.
Yeah.
We need to be access information, but as we do it, apply some critical thinking and take from it that which is important to us.
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting you say that your process of, I'd say, having these media outlets telling you what they would, I don't know, to paraphrase, like telling you what they would like you to think, which is then giving an anchor into, okay, if they want you to think this, then why, and then digging deeper into behind the messaging. One of the things also with your work with the SDG goals is very, very interesting, because this stuff is like blatant advertisements of what seems like solve the world of all problems, and then in reality, through your research, you dig into the nuts and bolts of actually what those things are meant to mean, but it's obscured by language, which is really, really interesting. So I'm actually really, really curious. So on your research process, you say that's like one angle of, say, approaching, say, propaganda or like corporate speak of what they want you to think. Is this like a normal avenue for you for how you actually begin investigations or start to kind of map out the bigger picture of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think as time has progressed, I've you naturally develop. I mean, what's the word? I suppose a sense of healthy suspicion about certain things. There are certain things that you happen that you just get a feeling that's not right. I mean, but that's something that has developed over time. And what I tend to do is find a subject that interests me. I mean, one of the great things about being an independent researcher and writer and journalist is that no one's telling me what I should or should not write about.
Yeah.
I write about the things and research the subjects that I find interesting and hope that others might too. That's a great thing that you don't get if you work for an outlet where you have to write. I mean, I have taken jobs where I've got a specific remit and things like that. But again, being a freelancer in that regard, I can pick and choose something. It needs to appeal to me. I need to be interested in it, and there's a practical reason for that. I can't write about something that I'm not interested in.
Yeah.
I struggle to write about something I'm not interested in. So I need to be interested in it to be able to write about it. But what I tend to do, I mean, the reason that I've come to this position now where I've got a kind of, I mean, I don't want to say, it's not like I've got some sort of super sense that I know. I mean, quite often I think, oh, that sounds a bit fishy. I start looking at it and it turns out I was wrong. Oh no, it is what it appears to be. I mean, that happens
Yeah.
probably more often than not. So there's nothing to write about from my perspective. But I mean, one of the things that that I've always advocated is, and looking at all information, is critical thinking. That we need. So I use something and this is something that was commonly taught to school children for many years. It's part of what we now refer to as a classical education, but a classical education used to be the standard education that was common to nearly across all schools. So looking at it from the classical education perspective, I often look at something, I take an approach that's based on an idea called the trivium.
Mm-hmm.
So, I consider grammar, which is the what, the who, the where, the when. So that, what happened, where did it happen, who was involved, the facts, the things that you can nail down that say, this outlines the facts of the event. And that can be quite lengthy process trying to nail that down, because you're often wading through interpretations of what happened. So I always try to find primary sources of information.
Yeah.
So if a member of the public said something about an event, what evidence is there to support what they've said about that event? You can't just say that because they've said something that might be true. Well, I'll rephrase that. It might be true, but it might be false. They could have got it wrong, or they might have an agenda. So you need to nail down the facts. What happened? So that's the kind of the grammar part of it. So then, the second part of the trivium is logic. So you then think, well, why has this happened the way it has? What explains this event unfolding the way it does? And that, again, that can take a long time to nail down, the causes and the antecedents that led to that event unfolding in the way that it did.
Yeah.
And then you can get to the rhetoric part of the trivium, the three parts of it, where you're trying to consider how this was managed. If you've nailed down the facts of what, where, when, and who was involved, you've got a logical sense of why this was done, and that might be very complex. You might end up going back through history, looking at primary source material from documents, news reports, all kinds of information, and that can give you a sense of how this thing was done, whatever this thing was.
Yeah.
So that's the approach that I use commonly, or mostly. That's. I mean, I have an inkling that something's not right, and then I go and look at that very much using what I would call critical thinking.
Sure.
And I use the trivium method, but I mean there are others. That's not the only one. There are other ways of doing this.
So that makes sense. So I'm curious then to like general workflow stuff of you're collecting a bunch of paper documents, putting links all together on your computer, or like how are you collecting all of this information so that you can then potentially go back to it and reference it? Because it's obviously with any of these investigations, it can be quite a lot of different things that you have to collect. Or are you writing reports or your book as you go along? Like, I'm just very curious to the literal technical, because one of the things I'm interested in is how to best help that process, like the most efficient way of reducing, let's say, laborious activities that then can speed up a process and then also can directly link back to sources for audience members. So one of the things I think is brilliant is all of this research, and then for audiences, they read generally narratives, but then they don't, in context, get the exact information that allowed you to gain that insight, let's say. So I'm very, very curious of how you put or collect all your information in a raw.
Yeah, so I mean practically, so I do most of my work on a computer. So I open up a folder. So if I've got an article in mind, I'll open up a folder for that article, and then I'll start the process of looking at the information. So I might subdivide that folder into legacy media articles, primary documents, secondary witness accounts. As I progress, I tend to add folders. What I normally end up with are a lot of folders, a lot of files inside a lot of folders, and it would be very useful, thinking about that, if I could have some sort of way of interlinking those and structuring that because undoubtedly it's the research that takes the time. The research,
Exactly.
an article I can bang out an article in an hour, but not one that's got any kind of depth to it. I can bang out an opinion, that's easy enough, but I can't put any depth to anything meaningful. Without, obviously doing. Sorry, my computer's just talking about problems. It's just shut down.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Might be the recording thing, but we'll see how that goes.
No, it's not. It's my laptop. There we go. I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how I wouldn't say I'm the most organized of researchers. I do end up with sort of thinking, oh, what was that bit? I end up spending a lot of time knowing that I've found something out and then not being able to find
exactly
not being able to find what I've done with it.
Yeah, it's like, so I know this, but like where did I know this from? And then you have to go and try and find that. Do you have issues with actually searching through documents? So you go to your folder, or it's like, okay, I know there's something inside of this like document that says this, but I just remember the name of it, or is it that kind of like?
Yeah, not so much. Once I find the reference, so if I'm searching online, I use quite a lot of I use a lot of advanced search operators. So all in text, site, that kind of thing. So I think if you're going through a big, a large document, then I mean, one of the things that's very annoying is that the mainstream media will write an article, and they'll reference a document, but they won't link to it, even though the article is published online.
For sure.
Right? So what they're doing is they want to tell you what they've interpreted as the meaning of the study.
Yeah.
They don't want you to go to the study and read it yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
So And often when you do, you find that what they've done is cherry picked a part of the study and have given an interpretation which is usually somewhat misleading. So what you can do, what I tend to do is, so say they say, a study from Oxford University about something published by, so there's clues there that you can go and find that study. So what I then tend to do is to go to try to find the study. So once you've found the study, then often that's paywalled, especially if it's a new scientific report or piece of research.
Yeah.
Now there are sites, I don't know whether I should mention them, but there are sites which can unlock that paywall.
Okay.
So that's what I tend to do. I'm not going to mention them, but I unlock that paywall.
Fair enough.
And then I can read the study. So there might be something in that I'm specifically looking for, which is referenced in the article. So it might be a quote by someone. So then I literally, just use Control F and find that quote or find that particular piece of information. But that might not tell me, particularly what I'm looking for. So I may have to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Or I may be able to find, what I often do certainly with scientific papers is that I start with the methodology. So what method have they used to come to whatever their conclusions are? I already know what the conclusion is supposed to be usually because it's been reported by somebody else. So then I start with the methodology and find out, well, how did they work out whatever this conclusion is supposed to be? And then I check the conclusion and the finding and see if it comports with the methodology. If I think it doesn't, then I might try and go and probably look at some of the annexes or something like that to see what data they've got to back up whatever claims they are making.
Interesting.
But I do that. I start with probably a snippet of information. I search. It might not be. I'm using scientific, but it could be anything. It could be a government report or something like that. A government website, for example. The government websites do this a lot. They'll write a big kind of press release kind of thing about the report, but you've got to find the link to the report. And often, certainly this happened during COVID. I remember the frustration was unbelievable because they were making claims about reports, and then you were going to find the report that was supposedly on the government website, and that was just a list of links to other reports. So the process then was tortuous, but normally it isn't that bad. But it certainly was during COVID, and that was something that I wrote about. That there was an obfuscation of data and analysis during COVID that was unbelievable. It was they really did go to town on covering up, the basis for some of their decision making. But normally I go to a report, just simply Control F it, find what I'm looking for, and then from there, if I have to read more of it or, read specific sections of it, that's what I do. With bigger documents, things like Agenda 21. So Agenda 21, the official book that was released for Agenda 21 is a thick old tome. It's a big, thick thing. But it isn't, the online, one of the advantages of online and why it's so important that we keep, because we now have unprecedented access to information.
Yep.
So if you go to the online version of Agenda 21 and you already have a reasonable idea what you're looking for, you can do that process that I've just explained. You can go through the document relatively quickly. In reality, there's not that. You can cut Agenda 21 down quite a bit because the actual recommendations and the actual parts of Agenda 21 that are relevant to what we've got now, Agenda 2030, is only a small percentage of the overall thing. But it's very you can't, when you've got the book in front of you, you can't research it quickly. But of course, online, that's exactly what you can do. So I think it's really important that we maintain access to information in this way. And obviously, the censorship agenda that is obviously being rolled out, I don't think there's much doubt about that. It's obvious.
Yeah.
I would say, is less about controlling reports and more about controlling our access to information.
Interesting.
Within, for example, I mean, the legacy media can say Oxford University has said that AstraZeneca's vaccines are all fantastic. Okay, now if they go down the censorship route that's envisaged, it will be increasingly difficult to find out if that statement is true or not, because you won't have the access to the actual study, perhaps, or I think this is much more, because they want to control information flow, and they want to control, what they really want to do is stop us doing that thing that we were talking about earlier. They want to stop us exercising any kind of critical thought, and examining information and gleaning from it what we think is important, not what they tell us is important. That's what I think the crux of this is very much about.
Yeah, I think so as well. But that's actually a really good point, because one of the things that we'd like to do is allow for people to have kind of local machine software. So there's a lot of issues with censorship in many different ways. And one of the ideas is how to turn people's computer into basically mini databases for themselves. And then if they want to share information between other investigators, it's like a peer-to-peer network. Also, as you just said, with censorship, documents change over time or get deleted, or the paths get removed. So trying to kind of archive anything that is found that is useful, like even Internet Archive is having issues where they're trying to take this down because this is a very useful tool for re-referencing what has previously been going on or said. So I think that's really, really interesting. This is why it's really important, or one of the ideas, to try and collectivize people's research, because I think, like yourself, there's a lot of people that are doing specific pieces of the puzzle, right, in isolation. And I think it'd be brilliant if you can connect people's research together, because there might be specific documents or things that you don't have access to or you didn't find that would be useful for your investigation. So that's actually another question as far as like collaboration. When you have done any of these investigations, how do you collaborate with people, if at all? You're like, okay, I need this type of information, maybe this person has it, this type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, using things like Telegram is very useful. So I mean, obviously that's another focus of attack for the censorship. So Telegram, something like that, a communication channel. I mean, there are plenty of alternatives, but I have used Telegram quite a bit, just private chats on Telegram. So what, I mean, I think everyone approaches it differently, but what we tend to do, and what I've done in collaborations in the past, is divide up the subject matter into specific areas that each of us is going to look at. Then we'll come back and say, well, what have you found? Or, well, I've found this. And that might have your fellow researcher might have found something that impacts on your research. So you suddenly realize, right, that's where that came from, or or often you might find, I'm going in the wrong direction here. There's something somewhere else that I should be looking, So, and I find working collaboratively is really great, actually, because, two heads are better than one. And, and as you quite rightly said, and I mean, this is why I think your project's a very good idea. I often am directed towards information, not that I didn't know existed.
Exactly.
I had no idea that this document might exist, or that this report might exist. I didn't even know about it. So, and and I hope, perhaps the people that I think I can fairly say that I know that that's a reciprocal thing. So I mean, I come at things from a certain angle, and the person that I'm working at it's coming at it from another angle, and that works both ways. It's mutually reinforcing. We both learn more from each other.
Exactly.
So that's so that's really important. I mean, and going back to what you're saying about archive, and about the Internet Archive currently being under severe political and pressure. This is a typical thing that states will do, that governments do. So following the Manchester attack, there was a terrorist attack in the UK in 2017. There was an inquiry, the Saunders inquiry. Now, there are 3 reports, but one of them split into 2. So you could say there are 4 main reports that were published by the Saunders inquiry. Now, in the Saunders inquiry, all the links that we use to, you know, things like autopsy reports and that kind of things, that the things that they are using to substantiate what is said in the inquiry report are all linked at the bottom. You know, there's a reference section at the bottom of each page. If you go to that reference section, the website that those original documents were hosted on is gone. It does not exist.
Brilliant.
Right. So they've removed all the links to the specific sources of information that they are quoting in the report. So you have got no way of knowing, if you read that report blind, whether what they are saying is supported by the evidence. You can't find out. Fortunately, when the Saunders inquiry first started, many researchers, you know, myself included, were posting all of these things to archive.org, or you know, to the Internet Archive.
Yep.
So they do still exist, but only because people have archived them. You know, I talk about something in my book called, you know, I think something I think I heard James Corbett refer to this as memory holing. You know, that so you just take information. It's like, you know, it's a virtual book burning at the Library of Alexandria. It's the same thing. They're taking information, making claims about information, and then burning the information.
Yeah. And through repetition, they push a particular narrative that then just becomes true because it's not backed into anything, and then people are conditioned effectively to just go, okay, I've heard it enough times, it must be true. Because also people don't really have much time in their days to like actually go and validate things themselves. They normally leverage trust from like people like you, or if they're in the legacy side of things, they just trust entities blindly. And this is where we get ourselves into trouble. So I'm very, very curious of how to put a spanner in that mechanism so that they can't really lean on these little tools that they do to just kind of like brainwash or manipulate people's perspectives. So yeah, that's the goal. I'm very like a few things came up with what you just said that made me think actually on one is trying to build a mechanism to protect information so there's no book burning, as you'd say. Another thing is then we have the ability in what we're doing to potentially use AI. And I know AI is controversial in the sense of it is also a mechanism of potential manipulation. But you can still, in my opinion, leverage these things to basically do things a little bit faster, but then build things in such a way that it suggests things to you, such as what you just said before. Like, I have no idea this document existed. So there's kind of ways you can use software to go, hey, there's this document that exists that relates to what you're doing. It talks about entity A, B, and C and has this information in it. So we can potentially use this where you put any document in there to explode the things that are important to you. And I'm kind of curious what those things would be. I have my own assumptions in the sense of like who, when, what, why, and then, as you said, like referencing. So where did this come from? But is there like one of the things is this analogy for this cork board with a pin and the line between different things, and you can find the thing in the middle. What are those things that you've, I guess, either found or would like to find that is kind of like that aha moment? That's connected to this thing. That's the dubious anchor or something along those lines. Like, what are examples of that you've found or you would like to find?
I think, you know, one of the things that it's a thread that I've been pulling for a long time, and that is the centralisation of control.
Yep.
So I am very much for, you know, obviously there is an agenda at play geopolitically, economically, financially, the world over, to centralise control.
Yep.
Now, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I just, you know, and it wasn't until I started reading, you know, some of the people that I mentioned earlier. But I mean, one of the things that really struck me, I guess, was Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard, which kind of revealed this notion, this idea, and it struck me that there were people in the world who really do consider nation states and the world a strategic game board. So how do they? And I guess the thing that I discovered through research, and that didn't come online, that was more through reading, but subsequently online, is tracing what I have termed, and it's something that's caught on, and I'm very pleased that it has, the global public-private partnership.
Yeah.
Because I realised that, and it was working actually with again, this came from collaboration. So this was working with a gentleman called Richard D. Hall in the UK, who read my book, my book about the pseudo pandemic, and mapped out from that the structure that I was talking about, because I was talking about global corporations, informed influencers, and he drew a kind of diagram of it, which was really useful. So from that, I sort of expanded on that and went through the book as well, my own book. I went back through it and drew out a more formalized structure of what I was talking about, because he represented it graphically. And once it was represented graphically, then I started looking at the think tanks that were involved, the policies that were coming from. Could I trace the flow of policy from a think tank idea that might have been floated half a century ago to a set of policy initiative announcements at a global level? We're often talking about the UN, but not always. I mean, there are other bodies as well that announce kind of global policy platforms. Generally, they're linked to the UN. So the UN is a hub, you could say. And thereafter, could I trace that to the implementation of government policy at a local level? So, one of the examples that I found that was really useful, and something that I think people might find very interesting, is if wherever you live in the world, wherever you live, if you go to your local authority website, no matter what country you live in, no matter where you live, and put in the name of your local authority website and sustainable development plan, you will find it.
Yeah.
You will find their sustainable development plan. Now, you can trace that all the way back to the United Nations and the Club of Rome and Agenda 21 and the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. So this is a global strategy and a global idea that you can trace all the way through this power structure, which in doing reveals the power structure.
Yeah.
So I guess the holy grail of what most people that are looking at this kind of information would like to nail down is who ultimately is behind it.
Yeah.
The notion is, that there must be some, I think people like Professor Carol Quigley with Tragedy and Hope, we might look at the Rhodes Milner Group and the kindergarten and so forth, and see a history there. But then we can go further back to groups like the Venetian bankers.
Yeah.
So that we're talking about a historical analysis of power. That would be, and a lot of people have made very good attempts at trying to analyze it. But obviously, the further you get back in history, the more subjective the interpretation becomes, and the more wishy-washy becomes the evidence.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking about just archaeology or something like that. But when you're talking about political ideology, that becomes more complex to try and nail down the players at that time, because just as we are now talking about who is manipulating policy and policy agenda today, so were the Romans.
Yeah.
So I mean, they didn't know who was manipulating policy, their own political environment. There were a lot of people talking about who was behind power then.
Yeah.
Caesar being a great example. Who was pulling Caesar's strings? This is a conversation that humanity has been having for thousands of years. So it would be great to get close to knowing. I mean, I think people have, as I said, made a very good attempt at trying to nail down who that might be and what groups are involved. And I, my little attempt is the global public-private partnership. I consider it very much a global network of sometimes competing power influences.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, and I think one of the dangers is in pursuing that. In trying to find out the hand behind the throne and nail it down, there is an assumption there that there is one. The assumption is that there is this all-powerful centralized body. Now, I don't see it quite that way. I don't think it is. I think just as in any other aspect of life, if you look at any global corporation, for example, while there's a board and a CEO and a chairman and all that kind of thing, there's also internecine squabbles and, backbiting. So, I think that is definitely ongoing at every level of power. So I wouldn't say that there is necessarily a single group, but we might be able to identify the groups that are vying for control at a global level.
Yeah, this is one of the things with what you say with the graphic representation. So this is my assumption that with visual sense making, which is what I call it, where you put these concepts, or in this case groups, and then you kind of extract the evidence over time. So like a visual sense map, basically you can go like a point in time. So like this year, this month, if you go back in time, that chart of power will change, right? People die, and new groups, and that you're talking about like two groups. So we have two that change over time, which is quite interesting. But one of the things I find hard also in conversations with other people is just this general notion of agenda, because people have a resistance generally to any kind of covert concept unless it's like the mafia. So people are kind of resistant to thinking that maybe there are covert groups that try to vie for control. I think this is an effect basically of manipulation, obviously. But one of the things I'm very curious to do is what can you do in a critical thinking perspective that kind of, as you said, outlines a group. So we can't say definitively it's Gary that's doing this thing. It's kind of like, this is a consistent pattern, and I can show you the consistent pattern with evidence. And then from this, I'm taking my, not so much an assumption, but this is seeming like something dodgy going on, and here's what we can point to. This is as far as I can get, because one of the things that's interesting is when you've spent so much time with this information, in your mind, things become, I would assume, more concrete, that it's more likely that this individual's involved or this individual's involved, rather than someone else that doesn't have that access to that information. So they're just they're leveraging again other people's perspectives, say journalists or friends, or very few have firsthand evidence of things to really kind of anchor into themselves. I'm curious, what do you think about that in your own personal experience with people that are resistant to, I'd call it like agenda, or like a covert means of controlling or manipulating people? I think most people can agree a concept of propaganda, but they don't believe it's ever affecting them.
So one of the things I always stress to people, and I stress to people in my work, in my writing, and personally, is that I don't know that I am right. Right, I do not know that I am right. I'm not claiming some kind of secret knowledge. Right? I am just saying that this is the evidence I'm aware of, and this is what I make of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, so for example, the World Bank has a database called ID4D. So the World Bank has published documents about ID4D and its purpose. It's going to be a global digital identity database. Now, whether it will become the global digital, I don't know. But you can point out to people there is a statement in those documents. You can reference the document and send them to the document and point out what is said by the World Bank in the document, that their intention is to provide digital ID for everybody from, and they use, often you find in these things, weird turns of phrases,
like what?
Everybody from 0 and above. Right? So everyone, I mean, why don't they just, I don't know why they didn't just say everyone, but from 0 and above. Okay, so you can say there is definitely a group, a very powerful, influential global group called the World Bank, that has in its mind a global digital ID database, and there's the document, there's the proof, there's them saying it. So therefore, if you then see, for example, one of the responses to the local to the recent riots, and I use the term riots loosely there, the recent disorder in the UK, is that the government announced that it needs to expand its national facial recognition surveillance system to stop these far right lunatics. Well, what that means is, obviously, that there needs to be some link between your face, which is a biometric a piece of biometric data and your identity. So we're talking about digital ID. So we know that the government in the UK wants to expand its ability to identify us digitally using biometric data. It has just openly stated that fact. We also know that the World Bank has got a plan for a global digital ID database. So therefore, I am suggesting that there is quite, not obviously, I'm not going to say obviously, there is a likely link between those two things.
Yeah.
So therefore, we might start asking questions like, is there any evidence of manipulation of events in the UK to encourage us to adopt digital ID?
Yeah.
That's a reasonable question to ask. It's not based on some sort of crackpot conspiracy theory. It is a logical conclusion that you can draw from the information you have available.
Yeah.
It's a reasonable question. So then you start pursuing that question. Now you might be, as I constantly, I might be way off track there. That might be a crazy thing to suggest. But if I can then find further evidence that tends to support that contention, I am going to report it. All right. So because I'm not told what to say by anybody else.
Yeah.
So I am free to do that presently. So that's the way. That's what I think. You know, and I'm not saying to anyone, therefore trust me. I mean, on my about me page on my blog, I openly say, don't trust me. Don't trust me.
It's funny.
I don't know any more than you do.
It's funny.
It's just
funny you
that
have to say it, right?
yeah, it's funny. Don't trust me. I don't know any more than you do. I just have more time to dedicate to this.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, this is the thing with general critical thinking and conversation, where ideas are not necessarily you. It's kind of like things I've collected in my best belief in some cases, and here's what I have. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily true black and white. It's like, okay, what I've acquired and what I make of it. That's what's great about multiple perspectives that are independent, right? So you can have, say, something propagandic. You can have something... you can have something that is basically with the intention of manipulating, and then you have someone that comes in with a perspective of what they research, but heavily biased because they just have a certain perspective of it. If you collect like 3-4 of these things, you can start to get the middle of all of it. So it's like, okay, what they maybe want me to think, what this person has found, but their point of view, opinion. And then from that, you can actually reference a middle ground. And even that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the really important things that, you know, as we were saying, I think before that we started here, one of the other responses to the recent disorder in the UK is that the government has said that it wants to introduce critical thinking to schools.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean, I mean, again, you know, we can look at UN documents about what they've called the importance of introducing critical thinking. Now, in the UN definition of critical thinking is to give children and pupils and students information from trusted sources.
Yep.
Right? That is the opposite of critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
The notion of a trusted source is a complete anathema to anyone that engages in any level of critical thinking.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a trusted source.
Yeah.
You know, all sources are questionable and everything is questionable.
Yep.
And it's up to us as individuals what critical thinking does. And you know, and it is something, you know, I spoke earlier about that I use something called the trivium method, but I mean, there are other versions. But whatever you choose to employ as a method of analysing information, as long as it's logically and valid, then you can practice that. It's like anything else. It's like playing golf or swimming or riding a bike. You know, the more you do it and apply it, the easier it becomes. Not necessarily easier, because it can become very complex, but more natural to you. You know, it's more you approach things from that kind of perspective. Now, one of the most annoying, something that really, really gets up my nose, is that when you start talking, and going back to what you were talking about how you discuss this with friends and family, but also how you discuss this with other people, perhaps online or in chat groups, is when you talk about critical thinking, there's kind of this inverse snobbery that that comes out and say, oh, critical thinking, that you think you're some sort of genius. Look, the point is, every one of us, every adult in the world who hasn't got learning difficulties, or is a normal, has capacity, can think critically. We can all do it. Every single one of us can do it.
Yeah, of course.
So that's one of the biggest reasons why we are the dominant species on Earth, is our capacity to think critically.
Which is also funny, and I think the reason for that is because we have to, in defense of each other, because we have the ability to manipulate effectively. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because we have to think critically because it's a survival tactic at a very primitive sense, and now it is a very high level, right? Where you have, let's say, very covert and very subtle mechanisms of exactly that thing, but we need to still use those faculties of critical thinking. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, no, well said. That is precisely the point.
Yeah,
we are a risk to each other, and we are the ultimate predators because of that ability.
Yeah. That's why I think it's actually really funny when people try to think that it's not necessarily the case, that someone could try to manipulate you at a larger level, which is like, no, I think that's our default. That's where we start.
Yeah.
I argue basically that all language is manipulation, or in the sense like persuasion manipulation. So it's not that we're trying to actively, control the other, but we naturally, by listening, our minds are being bent towards what they're saying. So you require that critical thinking to go, okay, what do I actually make of it myself? So it's a funny one.
Yeah, and I think an important aspect of critical thinking, something that I've learned in this. So going back to when I was talking earlier about, my background is very much, I suppose you would say, from the traditional left of politics. I was involved with unions, and I was quite politically active for left-leaning causes. But one of the things that I've done in terms of, working with other people, and often, is that I now quite often work with people that have got, a traditional right, what would have been called a right-wing perspective of the polity that we all share. And that's been fantastic. Because whereas I used to stand on the barricades waving flags and shouting at people, I now realise that we've got far more in common than we have differences between us. And although we don't agree on everything, and I still have that more, I guess, an underlying, not necessarily, I'm certainly not socialist, but I mean, I've abandoned that concept, but certainly a more kind of what I would consider to be a more kind of egalitarian kind of view that we're all equal, and equality of opportunity is something that really matters to me. That kind of thing. Whereas other people are perhaps more interested in how we can have better quality leadership. Right now, I've come to the position where I'm actually against the concept of leadership, but that's a separate issue, and I disagree with people profoundly who are seeking better leaders, right? But nonetheless, there's a lot in terms of how we are manipulated, how we are controlled. There's a great deal that I agree with other people, and they agree with me about, that from completely opposite sides of a traditional political spectrum. And that shows me that we have, not only do we have more in common than we have differences between us, but that we can all work collectively. Regardless of what our personal views are, be they cultural, be they religious, be they political, it doesn't matter. None of that stuff matters. These things are given to us to control us, I believe, and I know that a lot of other people, that even people of faith, agree that there are aspects of religion that are given to us to control us. So, but I can accept their faith and value their faith and respect them for adhering to their faith, and not impose upon them my thoughts about their faith, because they would find that disrespectful. So that's fine with me. I can accept that. as long as it
exactly.
doesn't come back in my direction. Right, so I don't, nor do I expect them to impose their value systems and beliefs about their faith on me, for example. And I find that once you've established that, it doesn't happen. People can work together regardless of these concepts, these control mechanisms that are foisted upon us. And then we suddenly realise that, yeah, we can work together, and a project like yours, which will hopefully draw in information from people with the vast array of different perspectives. It doesn't matter because we can, all of us, then access the information to draw our own conclusions, and we can all start acting independently to do the things that we think are in our and the people that we love and the people that we care about best interests. If we all do that, personally, I think we'll end up moving away from the need for any kind of social control and state and culture and all that kind of thing. But I mean, that's some nirvana that I've got in the back of my
I think
head
very
somewhere.
similarly, and from my let's say skill sets, I can see mechanisms to do this, but you have to have the critical mindset of what the real problems are. So like journalism, people try to do things within it, but they're not really getting the problem, which is these mainstream organizations come with agenda. They're not necessarily news or truth. So you have to reverse engineer that and go, okay, how do you present information in such a way that other people can make their minds up and all opinions can exist there? So this is very interesting because this idea of, say, like right, left, or just different perspective, researching the same thing, that's a goal. Like, how do you get people of just different perspectives working on top of the same information? But it's obviously so their perspective, right? So they might go down a certain path that you wouldn't because of your ideology. And then that might be very interesting because they might dig up something you would never even touch. And and historic context is like that as well, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Anyway, I think I've taken an hour of your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was fantastic. For the people listening, maybe you can suggest how they can follow your work and support.
Yeah, sure. Please go to my website, which is iaindavis.com, all one word. My name is spelt the Scottish way, iaindavis.com. Please check out my Substack at iaindavis.substack.com. You can also find my work on Unlimited Hangout, Geopolitics and Empire, and The Off Guardian, commonly, and Bitcoin Magazine as well. Also, if you want a copy of my latest book, it is freely available. So you can go onto my website and subscribe, and I'll send you a copy of my latest book, which is called The Manchester Attack: An Independent Investigation. And yeah, so that's me. Check out my work and check out what I'm rambling on about.
Cool. Thanks again, Iain.